Hello and welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending March 6th, 2016. Here, thanks to our overworked and underpaid diamond miners and sweatshop workers, we have compiled a collection of funny, interesting, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the spoils of their hard work. In the Raging number 61, Mike and Allison respond to a video that attempts to make an argument in favor of mass Muslim immigration. Spoiler alert.
Not an argument. It's not an argument. It's not an argument.
I see history in cycles, large cycles. Empires fall and empires rise and then they fall. And they usually fall for really obvious reasons. And this is one of them. You get two competing threat narratives going to battle over some issue. And they've forgotten what it is that they're trying to do. On the one hand, you have the anti-immigration individuals who don't seem to realize that what made the Western tradition so great was its focus on diversity, on bringing together to separate races, to separate ethnicities, to separate languages, to separate religions, and creating a common purpose in all of that. That seems to be forgotten on the white nationalist and the extreme anti-immigration side. And on the pro-immigration side, they seem to forget that while you're allowing people in, you still have to maintain what made them want to come in the first place, which is the particular type of order, customs, laws, what have you, that made your nation attractive to begin with. Because if you let that go, you're not helping anyone. And both sides seem to have this cartoonish version of what's going on. And I just want to address this side, because this side has got to have the most smarmy fucks on it.
During World War II, Japanese immigrants and their American-born kids were put into internment camps because there was a fear that they were spies or conspiring against the government. But
so were the Germans. If you don't include the Germans, the fact that the Germans were interred because we were at war with their countries, or the U.S. was at war with their countries, if you don't include that, you're excluding it. And you're excluding it for a reason. And what reason is that? Let's find out.
Later they found out that none of this was true, and in fact it was mostly just based on racism.
Really? It was mostly based on racism, yet they did it to the Germans too. Seriously?
The founding documents were also published in German to accommodate those populations, and in most of the 19th century, public schools across the entire country used languages other than English.
Do you know why it took so long for Germany to become a country? Because for most of its history, it's been a shredded tapestry of small regions with no common identity and no common language. If you want a nation state, you'll do well to refine it down to as few languages as possible. There's a line to most arguments, and in my opinion, this line stops long before you get to a single global country with a single global language. Obviously, I'm not in favor of that, nor do I want any language to go extinct. But if what you're trying to do is develop from tribes to nation state, then what you need to hold it together is a shared purpose and a shared voice. And as I already pointed out, English, by its very nature, is a shared language. It's shared between the Romans and the Germans and the Greeks and the Vikings and the Celts and who knows who else. You could do a lot worse than English. Get it down you. It'll put hairs on your hairs.
Guess what? Muslims don't integrate and they're violent. Go talk to other cultures and their attitude towards Islam. Okay. Now be that as it may. You're right. Muslim terrorism, probably not a big issue. Muslims raping white women, you know what? I'm going to say not a big issue. It happens. Rape happens. Even if it's a few percentage more, I don't give a shit. You know what I have a problem with? Advocating for Sharia law. Crimes happen. But this can threaten the very fabric of Western society, creating a completely different legal system. Not just little enclaves where you talk differently, people can't go in because, it's so violent. That's one thing. And that is a problem. I mean, don't get me wrong. That is a fucking problem. But what I am really concerned about is advocacy for Sharia law, advocacy for changing our laws. Now that is some crazy shit. If you don't like our laws, stay where you are.
You should be helping developing countries to reduce their average number of children per family to maybe 2 or 3. Instead, you're filling up the West with third world people who don't understand why it's unnecessary to have 8 children in this economic climate. Poor people tend to be accustomed to having that many children because they can make another pair of hands, give profitable returns on another mouth to feed. That's why number of children per family is like a universal marker of a country's economic development. And immigration policies like these do nothing whatsoever to lower that figure anywhere it's needed. They do everything to raise it and keep it high. What do you think you're doing to the overall child mortality rates? Same thing. You're not lowering them. You're not spreading the cream from the top. You're spreading the shitty residue from the bottom. And it makes no fucking sense. Unless you happen to be super rich and powerful and you want a high, dense population of warring factions with a single threat narrative in common, because that makes people much easier to control. Either that or you're just a fucking moron who's fallen for it, hook, line and sinker. But I digress. Oh wait, no I don't. I'm still on point.
The problem is that you're lecturing people from a position of not even respecting what makes the West attractive. It's not globules of money. It's not Hollywood mansions. It's the freedom, the tolerance, the diversity. The fact that if an immigrant group meets us halfway or 3/4 way, we'll let them in. If they address our concerns, we will integrate them. If they go through the vetting process, they're welcome to come. You're going to get rid of all of that. You're going to destroy it, so you won't even have it to give.
In Polecatcast number 103, we invite on our special guest Laughing Ogre and discuss the news of the week, including the closing of FetLife, the addictive quality of virtue signaling, GDC circle jerk, and more.
I will tell you about Kink. The popular kink-oriented adult social network website known as FetLife has had an unstable existence since its birth, to say the least. Events such as the release of 50 Shades of Grey, which saw the site flooded with normies, to the recent case of a wealthy Australian who allegedly used the website to find potential victims, haven't been helpful to FetLife's community. But now an even greater threat has surfaced, one that threatens FetLife's very existence and the service it provides. Last month, the community guidelines tightened a crackdown on depictions or discussions of edgier kinks, including blood, non-consent, alcohol, cutting, and the vaguely defined obscenity. The website also began purging thousands of photos, groups, and entire fetish categories with no warning to follow the new guidelines. What caused the sudden change in standards? As FetLife founder John Kopanis explained, the bank which the website does business threatened to close the website at the behest of several credit card companies and objected to the website's content for illegal or immoral reasons. Kopanis submitted to their demands and instated the new guidelines, but still appears to have lost the ability to process credit card transactions. Kopanis hasn't released any further statements on the subject since the announcement, and many questions still abound.
All right.
Yeah.
Hannah, do you have any thoughts? I thought you were going to chime in.
You just gotta love how they do this. They want to get rid of something that is moderate to mild. You put it in a list with a bunch of things that are less moderate and less mild and maybe even range to extreme, like illegal or immoral. Well, anybody can come up with ideas as to what they consider to be immoral. It's a different category from illegal. So you can ban a lot more things if you say immoral. And, the same thing goes along with these edgier kinks where they have this vaguely defined obscenity as part of how you could say cuss words could be banned under that. Mm-hmm. And it's much, much different to ban something that has language somebody doesn't like or maybe is in opposition to or opposed by a political ideology, as opposed to something that portrays, well, non-consent isn't exactly something, portraying it isn't exactly illegal either. There are people who find it distasteful, but hell, just don't watch it. But yeah, it makes it a lot easier to get rid of something if you put it beside something that's much worse or much more objectionable to people. It makes it very, very easy to censor.
I think the part about it that I find really interesting is that apparently there was an increase of users after the 50 Shades of Grey frenzy, like that whole the 50 Shades of Grey thing caught on, and all of a sudden there were all these people that were suddenly into this sort of kinky fetish stuff as a result of the book, and they joined FetLife, and then it was shortly after that it suddenly became puritanical.
Well, you know what? FetLife might be going the way of the dinosaur, but BME is always going to be around, and you're always going to be able to find the most disgusting things on the internet there. So thank God for BME.
Well, and I can imagine there's a lot of women out there that read the book and wanted to try the book version or some light version, or their own ideas on what this stuff is, and then they get into it and they discover there's actually an existing culture that was there before they walked in, and now they're mad. Kind of like all of the other areas that social justice types came into, not realizing that the culture that existed there before them, and got mad that it wasn't their way of doing things.
Psychology professors from both Bowdoin College and the University of Southern Mississippi have inadvertently validated what we have been saying all along about virtue signaling. Professors Zachary Rothschild and Lucas A. Kiefer published their recent findings in the latest edition of Motivation and Emotion. Here's a quote. Feelings of guilt are a direct threat to one's sense that they are a moral person. And accordingly, research on guilt finds that this emotion elicits strategies aimed at alleviating guilt that do not always involve undoing one's actions. Furthermore, research shows that individuals respond to reminders of their group's moral culpability with feelings of outrage at third-party harm-doing. These findings suggest that feelings of moral outrage, long thought to be grounded solely in concerns with maintaining justice, may sometimes reflect efforts to maintain a moral identity. End quote. For each study, a group of respondents were presented fabricated stories about labor exploitation or climate change. In some of the articles, the blame was placed on Americans. In others, it was placed on the Chinese, China. After reading these articles, the respondents were given a series of short surveys and exercises to assess their levels of personal and collective guilt, as well as anger at third parties like corporations, for example. There were 5 key findings from their study. 1. Triggering feelings of personal culpability for a problem increases moral outrage at a third-party target. 2. The more guilt over one's potential complicity, the more desire to punish a third party through increased moral outrage at that target. 3. Having the opportunity to express outrage at a third party decreased guilt in people threatened through in-group immorality. And 4, the opportunity to express moral outrage at corporate harm doers inflated participants' perception of personal morality. And finally, guilt-induced moral outrage was lessened when people could assert their goodness through alternative means, even in an unrelated context. Gamergate. In other news, following this report on virtue signaling, YouTube personality H Bomber Guy has been informed that he can now proceed to suck Max Starrett's big fat yellow cock.
This explains why it's addictive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know what it's like? It's like, you know, those the experiments that they used to do with rats, where they had they'd had the lever, and the rat would hit the lever, and something would fall out, be it like a treat or a piece of, LSD laced peanut or whatever the fuck it was, and the rat would just keep hitting that fucking thing to get the little cocaine dab or the peanut or the whatever the fuck it was. That's what this is. I mean, this this is that incessant need when you find that dopamine trigger inside of somebody's brain. These people just keep hitting that fucking switch. Just bang, bang, bang. Give me more, give me more, give me more. So, yeah, Ogre, hit it, man. What do you got?
Oh, well, I've really prepared for this one, folks. I won't say my name, but I do have a double master's. That and $3.75 will get me a coffee at Starbucks. But that said, folks, this is I actually went and looked because I have access to peer-reviewed journals. I looked at this study. It's very good. And what it goes back to is the id, the ego, and the superego. And so we're constantly trying to find this balance between the id of us we were born with. Does everyone know what I'm talking about before I try to get off in the weeds?
Yep. No, I know what you're talking about.
It's Freud's idea of our three personalities. The id we're born with. It's the I'm going to take a dump. I'll do it right now. I want the titty. I'll grab it. I want it. Boom, boom, boom. Then you have the ego that comes in and says, well, we should never take a dump, and even in the bathroom because somebody may hear it. Then you have the superego that says, well, if you turn on the water, they won't hear you taking a dump. So that's kind of as easy as I can break it down. Mm-hmm. And what we have here, we have the id of us. And we want it ties into the first story. Whoever put these stories together, I've got to give you props. They work together so well. It ties into the first one so good because if you are forced by societal pressures to quell a desire that springs forth from your id, it is futile. And what you will end up doing is this. You will always end up saying, I am bad inside. And then the superego takes over and says, hang on a second. What I've got is, let's do this. Let's dog other people because they like penis and they have a penis, or they like vagina and they have a vagina, or they like feet or stockings, or the list goes on ad nauseum. So this is the problem with society, folks. This, in a nutshell, this article is the reason the Muslims are killing the Jews are killing them. This is it. This is all of it. It's because the Muslims want to have sex with a man, if they're men, a lot of the times, and because of that, they got to chop somebody's head off for it.
I think what we have going on with a lot of these social justice warriors, I'm just going to come out and say it, because they're the ones that are the biggest on virtue signaling, is they want their id to be satisfied at all times because, to quote Jordan Peterson, Bucko, he said that they're like overly coddled by the protective mother, and they have that instinct of, well, they want the world to be like their mother was, and so you have this instant gratification, and they want validation at all times, and that's what virtue signaling is. Like, virtue signaling itself is a selfish action because you're not doing it because you care about the group that you claim to speak for. You're doing it because you want other people to see you acting out, saying things that make you look like a good person. So ultimately what you're looking for is acceptance, is admiration, is popularity, whatever.
Validation.
You want validation from external sources, from external stimulus, and that means that you actually have a problem with yourself. You have a problem with self-acceptance. And that's one of the reasons I think that SJWs cannot understand when a group that they claim to want to protect actually says, I don't need you. They can't fathom that idea that a woman might say, I can take care of myself, or that a minority might say, I can make my own way in life, or a Muslim that has fled oppressive countries says, can you please not ask those people to come over here because I came here to avoid them? Like,
preach it, brother, preach.
Part of that has to do with failure to understand and accept other people's boundaries. You look at the social justice types, and I keep going back to this. It's on the individual to communicate their boundaries, set and communicate their boundaries, and it is on the surrounding individuals to respect those boundaries. And your boundaries are a personal thing. They're about you. They're not about what other people can do with each other. They're about what other people can do with you, what you're willing to accept, and what associations you're willing to have, and so on. And it's something that the social justice mindset doesn't deal with very well on either side of that equation. everybody else is supposed to already know what their boundaries are, without them having to communicate those boundaries, and everyone else is supposed to respect those boundaries without having to be told what they are, even if they're abnormal boundaries. And nobody else is supposed to have boundaries that prevent the social justice mindset from taking over their lives.
The annual Game Developers Conference took place last week, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know what the GDC is all about, its basic description also comes from its title. It's a literal Game Developers Conference, where thousands of people within the games industry gather for lectures, panels, and tutorials on how to advance game development. These panels range from talking about how to make better hardware, better AI, better sound, basically everything you can think of that goes into making and selling a game. However, because this conference takes place in San Francisco, you'd be remiss if you didn't expect to see old-fashioned sock justice inserted in there just somewhere. Unlike years past, where social justice-related topics were relegated to GDC's advocacy track, because I can't talk, it has now become part of the education panels as well. Our biggest example of this came out of a panel titled "Teaching Students to Make Games Under Fascism." That's right, teaching students to make games under fascism, because apparently that's a thing. It was presented by this is so fucking dumb. It was presented by a woman named Bonnie Ruberg, who has presented these types of panels at past GDCs. In GDC 2015, she presented Creating Safe Spaces at Game Events. And at GDC 2016, she presented Building Safer Spaces in Game Education. You get the point. At this year's GDC, her presentation included slides that were passed around widely on Twitter. One slide said, "Video games are political. The way we make the way we make games is political. The way we teach our students to make games is political." The word political was highlighted in red on the slide. At a completely separate panel from Bonnie's, the slide said, and white cisgender able-bodied man as the default. The words "the default" were also highlighted in red. I'm not Max, so pardon me. I, Max, am not on today's show because me and Karen are chilling here in the Canadian version of San Francisco, aka Toronto, so I'm going to have to ask Brian, Scott, Hannah, and Mike to recall their arguments from the early days of Gamergate and fire away. Guns up, let's do this. For those that don't know, GDC is a conference where, you know, game developers from all stripe of game development come together, and they give each other awards and basically jerk each other off and tell each other how great they are. It's like, "Oh, you're so awesome. No, you're so awesome. You made we're awesome." Or it's basically one of those kind of things. It's a pat on the back party basically, and you know, more power to them. They're making games. They put a lot of hard work in this stuff. So I mean, there's some level of praise that you should be giving to these people because they're craftsmen, they're artists in a lot of cases. But this is a kind of thing that's been growing for probably about the last 10 years or so, with the games need to grow up kind of nonsense, where there's this current of, oh, games shouldn't be just for kids, so on and so forth, and games need to grow up. They're too infantile, they're too childish, and this, that, and the other. And we see people like this woman, Mrs. Goldberg, was her name? Or Ruberg, excuse me, Bonnie Ruberg, who I hate to use the word infiltrate, but but it's not far off. You have these people that are basically opportunists. They have their their own agendas, much like who's another person that we can think of named Sarkeesian that fits this description. I wonder. Yeah, I know, right? You have these people that are basically infiltrating our fandom. And when I say "are," I hate to use that particular word because it seems exclusionary. But use it. Yeah, as fans and such, this is something we hold pretty dear. And then we have essentially snake oil salesmen and charlatans trying to come in and ply their wares, be it this nonsense about creating games under a fascist state. I mean, get the fuck out of here. And here's the cherry on top of the sundae of GDC. They gave out an award at GDC this past year for game the best innovation in gaming. And do you know who won that, Brian? Do you know who?
Was it a certain young lady with a certain name that we may have just
No.
said?
No, it wasn't. No, it was not. It was not them. It was No Man's Sky.
one might ask, why does this matter? I know that this is like not a new thing to bring up because Gamergate. I watched a Rubin report, and it was recent, and Colin Moriarty was on, right? And he did talk briefly about Gamergate, and basically in his mind he didn't want to pay attention to any of it, and he thought it was all mean-spirited and pointless stuff. And it's fine because he didn't look into it. I would imagine that would be his takeaway. But I've asked myself many times, because a lot of people still say, well, why does this matter? And I think it's very important because, as it is said before, and I said this when I had my talk with Rags, when we had our Doge on Doge action a couple weeks ago, right. It is said that politics is downstream from culture. If the culture is being manipulated and people are trying to control it, and they're trying to like inject their shit into it, their politics, into places where no one wants it, then inevitably it will affect the culture, and people generally should be made aware that this stuff is going on so that they can choose, that this is important, so they can choose whether or not they want to be free from it. I'm not saying that people should be silenced, obviously. I'm saying that there should be a counter narrative, because right now the people with the biggest megaphones are making these kinds of statements. And the fact is, this is not a left or right issue. This is about people who want to be left alone and people who won't leave anybody alone. If you had the same panel and it was basically entitled, "How do we put Jesus in every video game ever?" then there would be just as much outrage as well as there should be, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to play Metal Gear Solid as Jesus. The way that culture normally changes is organically and slowly and over time. As you get introduced to new ideas and you sort of begin to embrace them and be okay with them, we get to a point where we're just like, this is cool, let's let the gays get married, so what? And then we move on. And yes, there'll be people who need to catch up to that. There are people who are behind on that, and they're like, well, I don't think that should be. Or maybe there are people who have a completely different opinion. Like they might say, well, why is the government involved with marriage at all? And why should we even need to do this? Or why do people, why should atheists get married? Or whatever. But they have concerns or they have opinions. And these are not regressive ideas, provided they're not actually trying to harm other people. The difference is that over time, our culture will inevitably embrace these ideas. And there will be a new line that will be drawn that'll be like, well, we're not going to cross this line. For example, things like pedophilia, right? We're not going to cross that line. We're not ready to do that, or we're not ever going to do that, or whatever. You just don't do that shit, right? And the way that, but the progressives and the regressives, or the far leftists, the Marxists, whatever you want to call them, the postmodernists, whatever, they are trying to get to what they think the utopia is, but they want to engineer our path. They want to force everyone to get there. They're impatient. They want to see a world that they envision in their head, and they want to see it in their lifetime. They want it yesterday. And because of that, they end up pushing too hard. They get impatient. And this happens. Feminists do this all the time. That's why the new wave eats the old wave and becomes more radical. So essentially, that's the way feminism has evolved. The radical parts of the first wave becomes the next wave. The radical parts of that wave becomes the next one. And you either go along with it, or you're eaten by the beast as it begins to evolve. So
man, that's deep. That's deep, man. That's deep.
Well, thank you. But that's what I'm talking about. This is a forced evolution. Video games are ultimately just a fun pastime. And my biggest issue with this, aside from the fact of everything that we've talked about, is that when you start pushing this identity politics shit into anything that is a creative field, such as gaming, film, paintings, literature, music, whatever, you will inevitably kill the medium itself, because the creativity and the desire to create something from nothing, that drive is annihilated, and it actually becomes less important in favor of these other things. I'm going to go back to the Colin Moriarty interview. He was talking to Dave Rubin, and towards the end of the conversation, they were both talking about how much they liked old games, because old games were just about gameplay, and new games are more about narrative in most cases. And the gameplay often takes a back seat, even though the potential for better gameplay should be far higher. In many of the cases with these more like AAA shit titles, they tend to actually become less of a focus. In not in all cases, but in many. And I agree with what they're talking about. You're never going to get things like Castlevania or Mega Man or Mario, because those things were all gameplay with like a premise. Like, okay, you have to go do this. But who cares? You have fun. And you're like, oh shit, this is fun. But now it doesn't. It's more about narrative. That's why everyone cares about, you know, how big the budget is, how good the graphics are, what famous person is in it, what's the story about, what's the main character, is it female, is it male, is it a minority, can you customize it? And it's like, yeah, that all that stuff is fine, but does the game play well? Because I think we're losing focus on that, and that's what I'm talking about. At the core of it, these are the things that end up at risk, and I don't know. I mean, I'm concerned for the industry because it's one that I take a lot of joy in. But I'm also a person that's really into media. I love film. I love television. Well, I don't really like TV, but I like film. I like music, and I like video games. So I want it to do well.
I used to like television before the social justice crowd got a hold of it.
Yeah, I don't like it anymore. That you can actually look at TV as an example of what I'm talking about. I mean, yeah, it's still around, but I don't think anyone watches it that much. Most people watch YouTube.
The whole changing it from the inside thing is when you when you get to the inside, like, as you know, just speaking from my own experience, like, you know, when I worked for Destructoid, when I was on the inside, I saw how things worked. There's a reason that things are the way they are, and they've been that way for a long time, and they are set in stone basically. And trying to change those kind of systems, even if you get on the inside, is the, you know, the unstoppable force meeting the unmovable object.
Exactly. It's like,
so you're better off being ground level like we are.
It's,
you know,
like,
we're actually hopefully affecting change in a smaller arena, but it is still change more than we would be able to do in a political sense.
Trying to fight something like this from the inside is essentially like letting a dragon swallow you so you can kill it from the inside out. Drake University, a private school in Iowa, is being accused of violating state laws in a first-of-its-kind Title IX retaliation case. Title IX is back. It's not going away. Okay. Tom Rossley, a trustee who served 23 years on the university board, was fired after defending his son, accused of sexual assault, from a kangaroo court investigation. According to the College Fix, citing Rossley's suit, the accuser conceded on the record during a later Title IX hearing that she initiated sex without his consent. Drake University effectively ignored these claims, prioritizing the female student's accusations and later firing Tom Rossley after his complaints. Tom Rossley has now filed a federal lawsuit accusing the university of failing to accommodate his son's learning disabilities in the sexual assault investigation. Both students were intoxicated, but the female student initiated oral sex on Rossley's son. By the same standards given to female sexual assault victims, the son was not able to give consent. However, despite the claims, the male in the situation was the only one that was investigated, and the counterclaims were labeled as retaliation. Comfort rooms were provided for the accuser and her family, while Drake University required the accused to be his own advocate and act as his own legal representative, despite knowing about his language disability, and was provided no access to his father nor comfort rooms. Rossley's lawyer, Andrew Miltenberg, has represented dozens of male students found responsible for sexual misconduct. According to Miltenberg, Drake University has both covered up the father's complaints about his son's treatment and failed to investigate the son's own pleas for help after being assaulted by a female student, violating their own rules.
First of all, the primary victim of a situation like this one is the falsely accused. Right. And I got to say that first because I don't want people to think I'm taking that lightly. But think about this for a minute. Okay? On one hand, we have the falsely accused facing a significant penalty that is a huge detriment to his life. It is academic career wrecking, and therefore it is future career wrecking. So it is a major thing for that guy. All right. But what if we do this same process with somebody who's not falsely accused, somebody who actually commits a violent sex crime, and the student against whom that is committed chooses not to go to police because their advisor at the school said, well, you don't have to go to police. You have an easier time getting a conviction here at the school. And all that happens to her, all that happens to the perpetrator is that she gets kicked out of school. And okay, so her career's wrecked. So her future career isn't going to be the same that it was, and that's rough for her. But what is she not stopped from doing again? Because where is she not going? She's not going to jail. She's not stopping. She's going to do it again. She'll just go somewhere else and do it, or he'll just go somewhere else and do it. And for those who find it scarier because I said he, shame on you. And for everybody else that got what I did there, the fact of the matter is, in this situation, if this guy had made an accusation on campus, that's all that would have happened. Is this girl would have got kicked out of school. If he had a criminal accusation to make, and instead of making it to the police and dealing with an actual police investigation and a prosecutor deciding whether or not this needed to go to court, and a judge and a jury deciding whether or not the accused was a perpetrator and the perpetrator who was convicted needed to go to jail, here we have now a person who can go on and commit this crime again with impunity. And each time they do it on a campus, they can commit it with impunity. And it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman. It matters that on one hand, we're punishing the falsely accused for crimes they didn't commit, and we're putting them in dire straits. And on the other hand, when somebody does commit the crime, no, they're not getting away with it wholeheartedly, but they're not getting locked up. They're not getting the whole system that is put in place to handle sex crimes. Is all that stuff meaningless? Can we get rid of the sex offender list now, since universities are taking care of it? And we should also get rid of the sex offender therapies that the state mandates people who are convicted of sex offenses to go to, because obviously they're not necessary, because they can do that on the campus.
I think what's really messed up is that the father lost his job on top of everything else. Yes.
It's another wrinkle we forgot about.
Yes. Tom Rossley, who has been essentially an admin, a trustee, 23 years on the board of the university, was fired because he defended his son, who was accused of a sexual assault, even though the woman is the one who initiated oral sex on the son. So the woman initiates sexual contact with an autistic kid. Basically, he's autistic, or he's got extreme ADHD, anxiety, and other sort of social issues. Not that I'm not trying to victimize this guy any more than is necessary, but she initiates sex with him when they're both drunk. Then after that, she accuses him of sexual assault. Then the courts go after him, and then when his father steps up and says, hey, that's fucked up, I don't accept it, they fire him. Right. This is the levels of fucked up this is.
This is a situation where Title IX might start butting heads with the Americans with Disabilities Act, because you have certain entitlements as a person with recognized disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And mostly those extend to the classroom and university. When it comes to disabilities like this, where communication is communication issues are part of the disability, you have the right under the Americans with Disabilities Act to certain concessions to help you with your communication issues. And what they did to this student was the opposite. So the firing this father may end up getting them in trouble specifically because of that, because his complaints in large part had to do with his son's disability being not accommodated correctly on the university campus during the course of this hearing. And frankly, they've really put themselves in a rough spot doing this, because they're going to have a really rough time defending failing to accommodate a student's disability because he was accused of something because the student that took advantage of him while he was drunk didn't want to get busted for what she did.
Yeah.
That's really going to come back. There's heavy potential for that to come back and bite them in the ass, and I hope it does.
On Pussycat Cast number 4, we talk about more news of the week, like the digital release of Cassie J's The Red Pill, Caitlin Moran's decree that girls not read books written by men, and how this girl
catch me outside, how about that?
defines expectations and how she represents feminism in 2017. Cassie J's documentary film about her trip down the rabbit hole known as the men's rights movement is now available for streaming on Amazon, iTunes, Vudu, and Google Play. It is also available through the Dish Network, Cox Communications, Verizon, and other television services. On Google Play, this is especially awesome. It is the #1 documentary streamed and has a 5-star audience rating so far. Way to go, Cassie J. Do you guys have any thoughts on the Red Pill stuff?
I think it's really encouraging, actually, that it's this high so fast. I thought that was great news. I was thrilled to see that.
Absolutely.
I do have a thought on this too. I noticed that on Google you can review the Red Pill, and I have this expectation that feminists are going to flood that with negative reviews and negs, where they've started doing this thing where they say, oh yeah, and this sort of comes straight from a person that's kind of an ally, or at least that portrays herself as an ally to the men's movement, and that the neg that they're doing is, oh yeah, men's issues are definitely valid, and these issues need to be talked about, and we need to work on all of these problems. But the leadership of the men's rights movement is terrible, and men's rights activists shouldn't be the ones dealing with these problems, that kind of thing. So it's needed for people who have seen the movie and have a takeaway from it that's positive, that have a different opinion than that, that have been a part of the movement and are aware of the movement's goals and activities and everything, to write their own reviews to counter the behavior that we're going to see. So I'm basically recommending, if you've seen the movie, go on Google and write a review, because it's otherwise it's going to be drowned out by these negs and the negative reviews.
The widely celebrated feminist author and columnist has called for girls to avoid reading any books with male authors until they are grown women. Moran, a Times of London columnist behind the best-selling How to Be a Woman, because she knows how, obviously, argued that reading great works by males will make young women cripplingly insecure. She named J.D. Salinger, William Faulkner, Raymond Chandler, Ernest Hemingway, and Philip Roth as male writers particularly worthy of being ignored. As an International Women's Day article written for the publishing house Penguin, who sell an awful lot of books by male authors, by the way, she said, quote, "If I had one piece of advice for young girls and women, it would be this. Girls, don't read any books by men. Don't read them. Stay away from them, or at least don't read them until you're older and fully formed and battle ready and are able to counter someone being rude to you in conversation. Not with silent embarrassment or internalized mute fury, but a calm, fuck you very much and goodbye. Male novels," Moran says, "make her feel unwelcome and uncomfortable and left her with a broken heart because of the cold way they present female characters. The fact that she willingly acknowledges all these books as works of genius is, apparently, no reason to engage with them until adulthood." Moran concludes, "No, they are not the right books to read if you are a young girl. They are not the voices you should allow in your head until you are grown, until you can argue with confidence with a narrator, with a genius, with a worldview. Girls do not read books by old men." In a related story, Loganberry Books in Ohio has obscured the identities of all of its male authors in the hopes that customers will buy more books by women. Effectively putting Moran's idea into practice, they reversed every book on the shelf written by a man, which left the spine facing out the wrong way, which is inward, so that nobody can tell which book is which. They put up a sign saying, "We've silenced male authors, leaving the works of women in view."
I think this woman's real issue is she doesn't think that women can stand on their own merits. And so she's threatened by the fact that male authors are able to present female characters as fully developed human beings with weaknesses and flaws and human motives for doing things just like male characters. And how dare a man look at not just men with a critical eye, but women too, because that's sexist, right? You can't have a full human look at women. Women have to be right all the time.
Well, it's very bizarre.
Like the idea that she expects you to have to argue back with these authors' portrayals of women. That tells you everything right there. Like, shame on men for noticing that women are human. Shame on male authors for breaking down the pedestal. And I'm surprised that she didn't mention Ambrose Bierce, because if she can't stand Hemingway, you would think that she would be pissed as fuck at the guy that described in his Devil's Dictionary a garter as an elastic band intended to keep a woman from coming out of her stockings and desolating the country. Which Ambrose Bierce is one of my favorites because I love his dry humor. But it just blows my mind that how many ways feminists can find to tell women that we are not allowed to be well-rounded people, and we are not allowed to accept other people's view of us as well-rounded people with weaknesses and flaws and human motives, except, of course, when those get us out of accountability for something.
Stealing cars from TV producers and credit cards from mom, calling women hoes, fighting their mother, and even getting banned from an airline for punching a passenger. Sounds like another case of toxic masculinity, except that in this case, it's a young woman, so actually it makes for a feminist icon. Cash me outside, how about that? You know the meme, but you may not have heard she is now a feminist icon according to BuzzFeed. Cancer. What could be the logic behind this assertion, you might ask? Well, how dare you, sir? How dare you not understand why a 13-year-old Danielle Bregoli is clearly the voice of robust female empowerment everywhere? You know what? If you don't know why she is clearly a beacon of the power of the feminine, which is a social construct, but I digress, I almost don't even want to tell you. But in the interest of educating and enlightening you on how feminism works, I will tell you. You see, Danielle was a girl who was brought on the daytime television show Dr. Phil by her mother, who was at her wit's end trying to raise this child, alone by the way. Dr. Phil, a fucking white male, was essentially participating in an intervention in an effort to expose all the harm Danielle was doing to herself, her future, and her mother. This is clearly an act of institutional oppression, as Dr. Phil is part of a system that is trying to force young girls to be demure, polite, and silent. Well, no more of that. Danielle tells it like it is, and despite her being only 13 years old, she has accomplished so much, such as marketing her own meme on t-shirts, which is entrepreneurial, stealing cars, that's assertive, appearing on world star hip-hop music videos, that's performance art, and punching passengers on planes on behalf of her mother, which is defending the sisterhood. What a great feminist she is. But, to be serious, I am shocked that this article is probably the first one that BuzzFeed ever wrote that I actually agree with. Not for the reasons they give, however. How is Cash Me Outside Girl a feminist icon, you might ask? Well, here's how. 1. She is a 13-year-old child with a 7th grade education, which is more than Caitlin Moran. 2. She is full of anger towards everyone else, especially women that she deems as jealous hoes. 3. She escalates the violence easily and quickly. 4. She has extreme mommy and daddy issues. 5. Her father isn't even in her life, despite the fact that he really wants to be. 6. She is immensely concerned with being popular, despite claims that she doesn't actually care. 7. The entertainment industry is giving her heaps of attention and empty praise. And 8. Her Twitter feed is full of people who worship her unconditionally despite her being a moron. However, there is one trait that I think is vital to being a feminist that Danielle does not have. She does not play the victim. Give her time, though. She might learn that from her mother.
You know, when you think about it, the whole talk show phenomenon that comes out of this, it's a thriving example of the market that fetishizing dysfunction creates among women. And like Dr. Phil, Oprah basically made Dr. Phil. If I recall correctly, he started out, his public stuff started out more on her, like nobody knew who he was until he appeared on Oprah. And Oprah herself, like I'm a huge non-fan of Oprah. So I'm going to hate on Oprah here for a minute. She's basically a ripoff of Phil Donahue, put her own spin on talk shows. Her entire career is basically based on copying his gig and then taking it to an exploitative level where she is cashing in on basically the attitudes of her degradation, hungry, dysfunction, fetishizing, mostly female audience. And this is, you know, it's not just Oprah. You got like the old talk shows. I don't even know who's on anymore, but I remember Geraldo. I remember Sally Jesse Raphael, Maury Povich. But you take the pretense of their compassion out of all of these talk shows. You take the pretense of benevolence out of putting these people's dysfunction on parade, which is what they're basically doing. They're turning them into a sideshow. South Park got that right too. And you find out underneath it all, these guys are all just Jerry Springer. He's the most honest talk show host there is because he pretty much admits it's a circus. And it'd be typical of a feminist to talk about this phenomenon as if none of the women involved in it have any agency, and the talk shows aren't successful because their viewers keep watching and keep buying everything the hosts and their cohorts are selling, that they don't have a continual supply of guests because of the willingness of so many people to put their dysfunction on display for 15 minutes of fame and whatever financial reward they get for being on the show. And Dr. Phil isn't a success because of all of the women who hang on his every word like he's the messiah of common sense. Nope. It's not like this is an entire industry pandering to an audience that mostly stay-at-home moms and mostly judgmental old ladies. No, none of that. All of it happens because the men involved inflicted this orchestrated phenomenon on all of the poor, unsuspecting, unwitting, and unwilling women involved. That's the feminist narrative, and they're sticking to it.
The BuzzFeed article, they do say one other thing that I found really weird, and I'm trying to figure out if BuzzFeed is aware of how kind of racist they sound. They essentially say that one of the reasons though they are admiring this girl is because she does not behave as a white girl typically behaves, and that for whatever reason, that is something to be lauded. Now, this is why I find it strange. Acting ghetto is not something that is owned by minorities. I think that I don't even call it ghetto because I prefer ratchet, because I've seen, and I don't know that means that it's, you know, like more or less a black thing. I don't think it is, because I live in Humboldt Park in the West Side, and there are trashy people of all colors, and they all talk like this because they, you know, it's like the culture. It's not a race thing. But for whatever reason, BuzzFeed is like talking about the way that she speaks as though she is somehow breaking some kind of mold and doing something that white girls don't do. And I'm like, where are you getting this shit from?
The symbol of the bull means, like what it was created to mean, was aggressive financial optimism and prosperity. And the bull has just been a very powerful symbol here in New York City. Every time I pass by it, I take a picture of it, and you know the tourists are always flooded around the bull, and it's a beautiful, powerful symbol. So now it's the feminists have made an issue out of it, and they've turned it into a thing where it never was a thing, and it never represented anything anti-female ever. And now they're making the bull, our beautiful bull, means something anti-woman. And now I find this very creepy because they take this little girl and they're putting it in front of a charging bull. That image is disturbing to me personally. I find it a very bizarre thing. And the bull was not the symbol of hostility until they placed a little girl in front of it.
Yeah, they completely changed the context because
yeah.
What was simply...
Or did they?
Well...
Because, like, I see this as... Feminism, if you listen to Aaron Pitsey talk about feminism's history, it started out as an anti-capitalist thing. The one of the things that chased her away from the sisterhood that they claimed to be promising of women supporting each other and women working together for a better world was the communist shit that was being perpetuated from the beginning within the second wave of the movement. And if you look at the first wave's writings, that was in there too. The collectivism was in there too. This is just a continuation of that. They're basically saying that meritocracy is anti-woman. Feminists find every way they possibly can to say that meritocracy is anti-woman because women can't stand on our own merits. You know, and it's not to pun too much, but it's bullshit.
I'm actually here to talk about a hashtag I put together last week, and it was shortly after Trump did his announcement for jobs. He was talking to Congress, and he made a call. He was talking to the Joint Congress, and he made a call for a $1 trillion plan for infrastructure jobs. And I had been doing my normal homeless outreach, getting sleeping bags and supplies to homeless men. And when I heard this, I was very inspired by it, because we have a problem in this country. Well, we have a few problems when it comes to homeless men. The first and foremost is that the mental health system, and thereby the homeless system in this country, is horrifically feminized. So a lot of men find themselves, once they become homeless, trapped in that situation by a combination of dependency upon entitlement systems and lack of encouragement to ever become part of society again, because they're always portrayed as the villain in situations. And the agency everything is bled out of them. The lack of affect that you can see in a beaten down homeless man's face, well, it breaks my heart, honestly. And with all of this work that I do for homeless men, what I heard in what Trump was saying was that there's an opportunity, a rare opportunity we have to do something great for the homeless in this country.
On Fireside Chat number 51, we bring on retired Professor Alan Franson to discuss masculinity and male affection in the military, in boxing, in combat, academia, and more.
I've been working on a book. I've been working for a while on a book on boxing and masculinity. And I started putting parts of the book up on a website just to see what they would look like and what kind of response I would get. I had sent proposals for the book to numerous publishers, all of whom turned it down. Most of whom didn't even respond because in fact, when I looked through literary agents and wrote to them as a way of accessing publishers, almost all of them were women, and I could find dozens and dozens of references to women's studies and gender studies and so on and so forth, and absolutely nothing about masculinity. And I realized that the traditional publishing door just was not going to open for me outside of academia for a book on boxing and masculinity. So I put a little bit of it up on the web, and it came to the attention of some progressive feminists who really were outraged. I think what happened was that they had assumed, because I've been in the profession for a long time, they know that I'm gay, that they figured that my politics and their politics were the same. I mean, that was just it. They had no idea who I was, but they just assumed that I agreed with them on everything. And it became apparent in the course of the criticism of the effect of feminism on men that I was making in some parts of this website that, I became, as you called me when we first met, I'd become a pariah. And the more that, that was about a year ago, and one can only see that this trend in academia has intensified tremendously in the year since then. This whole idea that professionals have some kind of right to freedom of speech seems to have gone out the window, that the progressives, or as some people call them, illiberals, pretty much insist on dominating the discussion. So I stood outside the discussion, and that's where all the controversy started. But I stand in a long and proud line of men who have been, criticized and attacked and bullied, really, I would say, for standing outside, mainstream view on things like feminism and also on violence. So I think that's kind of a thumbnail of how I got here. The professionals I talked to in public relations and other areas, they said, well, I think, this is obviously a lot of abuse you're taking, but the fact is the ideas that you are advocating make a difference to them. And this is just some sign that these ideas about men are worth advocating for, because there's a lot of resistance to them. And I think that's where I found the conversations that we had to be very helpful. Karen's work, for example, and the work of other people I could see were connected to the Badger Brigade, are all espousing unpopular points of view. But it's really great to know that there's a community there of people who can agree with each other, and that there's more than one or two of us.
Yeah, and we don't have a problem disagreeing with each other either. We kind of work towards the trying to find what the truth is, trying to pull back the veil, as it were, and look at stuff, no matter how uncomfortable it might make us, because that's what a lot of this, I think, has to do with, especially when you're discussing gender. It's about going and looking at uncomfortable truths that that men and women deal with, and being honest with yourself about it. And a lot of times I think that these ideological orthodoxies in like feminism, for example, they can't do that. They can't engage in that. It's risky for them.
Right. I think one reason for that, and this is something else I saw overtaking academia in the course of my work. The university has become a place for advocacy. It didn't used to be, but the classroom became a place for advocacy, and feminism and gender studies were leading the charge there, I think. That it wasn't a place to talk about ideas or discuss two sides of an issue. It was a place for advocating.
It was where you made activists. It wasn't so much where you challenged ideas and you sort of hashed things out and asked difficult questions.
No, that's absolutely out of the question now. I remember maybe it was 15 years ago that we had a visiting speaker. We went out to dinner. I was sitting at a table with my colleagues, and one of them said that her point in teaching her history courses was to turn her students into, as she called them, good little Democrats. I laughed because I thought she was making a joke, but she wasn't joking.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, isn't that, good little Democrats. I wouldn't even have said it. But the idea that my job as a professor was to turn a student into a member of a political party, it never crossed my mind. But I was clearly the outlier there. I was clearly the person who thought that this was, an odd thing to do in the classroom. Queer studies was a big thing for a long time in the 90s. There was this feeling that even though you said it wasn't sexual, it really was. That everything sooner or later could be boiled down to a sexual context. Any kind of intimacy translated into sex. That's what made it queer. And that somehow Orthodox sources resisted this, but in fact, as I tried to point out in the book, there was a lot of talking about physical intimacy between men even among Quakers in the 19th century, people of the same sex sharing a bed was an accepted and acknowledged thing. And the idea that this was somehow transgressive did not occur to them. Queer studies is very heavily invested in the idea of the transgressive. And it tried to make any same-sex relationship a transgressive one. And I thought that was nonsense. That's why I wrote the book.
While it may no longer be called queer studies or queer theory, I have noticed a lot of progressive news outlets or media outlets that write articles about how men that are straight men should engage in homosexual behavior because it would be good for them. And this is really encouraged, like over and over. I see it, men having sex with other men that are straight, and so this way they can be comfortable with, being men. This is the way you do it, or giving each other oral sex or hand jobs or whatever. And I thought that was really strange that they were trying to essentially shame heterosexual men that may have no interest in that whatsoever, and telling them there's something wrong with them because they don't. And
right, good for you. I think you put your finger right on it. It's an attempt to shame men who participate in what these people call heteronormativity, and to shame them into some kind of transgressive behavior. Mm-hmm. They want these men to feel like victims. And what they're exercising, I think, it is a form of bullying. I think these people are trying to demonstrate their moral superiority. They know what's better for these men than the men themselves. Mm-hmm. I used to say to students, if you wanted to find out what your politics were, just tell people you were a gay man, and they would start telling you right away what you believed in and who you voted for.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how it works. I mean, they're strongly identified with the transgressive, and they are determined that nobody should enjoy what they consider the privilege of normalcy. But I think you're right that their tool for this is shame, which is always a dishonorable tool. Mm-hmm. But it's and a lot of men are shockingly susceptible to shame.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it works, and it is cowardly. That's what I would call it. I think it's a coward's tool.
It is a coward's tool, and it is a form of bullying. I really felt that a year ago when I was reading the things that these people, some of whom, I had worked with for many, many years, the things that they were saying about me. I thought, well, these people are bullies. I didn't realize this. And in this bullying situation, it's the bullies who have the problem. People who are trying to bully straight men into homosexual relationships it is a form of bullying, and they're trying to demonstrate their moral superiority. I think what it gets at is that the only position that they feel comfortable in is an oppositional one. Mm-hmm. And they have somehow managed to merge anger and opposition. And in doing this, I think they lose a lot of political power, the very thing that I think they're interested in. Because it's hard to see what they do stand for, and very easy to see what they stand against. Even their reading of my work, I think, is an example of this. They didn't see what I wrote about boxing and masculinity as being something in favor of men. They saw it as something attacking women.
Of course.
And I mean, almost anybody who writes anything critically of feminism, male or female, is going to be called a misogynist. That's just their stock in trade. But it's a kind of unfocused anger. I don't think it's got a lot of principle behind it.
No.
Except they're right and we're wrong. Mm-hmm. And we have to submit. We have to have sex with men because then they can see us as members of a victim class that they can manage. I think that's what they really like to do, is to manage victims.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of submit, I think that their lack in foresight with the way that they, they're more about standing in opposition, as you were saying. So like they know what they're standing against, they just don't know what they're standing for. That's one of the reasons why they partner up with Islam, for example, which is like they have a common enemy, but they don't realize what they're partnering with is in many ways does a lot of the same things that they tend to stand against, but even more so. But because they share a common enemy, which is Western capitalist white cis male whatever, then they're just like, well, we don't care if you guys what your issues are, because you guys hate the people that we hate, so we're going to go after them together, and we're going to defend you to do it.
Anything that stands outside of or defies classification or boundaries, that's status that they seek.
Well, they've actually transcended transgender now, and they've gone on to other kinds of gender, which actually sort of flies in the face of transgender people. That's where the story with Jordan Peterson, but not limited to his deal with Bill C-16 in Canada, that essentially allows for non-binary pronouns. That became a big discussion because progressives, when we look at protests and stuff, we're mostly looking at college age or high school age kids that have learned this stuff from their professors, their teachers, and the internet, Tumblr and stuff. And they're all working with bad information, but they're so dogmatic in their belief towards it. So I wouldn't blame the kids so much as the academics that have sort of passed this on, but they've actually gone beyond trans people, whereas a trans person that undergoes a surgery and hormone therapy and all this other stuff so they can go from male to female or female to male, they are actually trying to change their sex from one to another. People who are trying to essentially just change the way they dress and wear their hair cut a certain way, and they just want to look androgynous, and they take on some made up word that represents a gender that doesn't fall into one or the other. They're not they claim that what they do is it falls in line with trans people, but they don't realize that trans people are not concerned with pronouns by and large, because they are men turning into women or women turning into men. They're not trying to find some middle ground, and this is what the discussion is all about.
Yes, I think the origin of this idea actually goes back to some of Judith Butler's work on performativity, that we aren't male or female, that we can perform gender, that gender is a performance, and this kind of thing. It's an attempt to invent a new category. I think sometimes just because academics are so desperate to find something new to say, that they're always looking for a way to break down what you or I might think of as a category. That's where they find newness. There are boxing coaches who just hold mitts for their boxers and have their boxers do drills, and that's all great and that's exhausting. But the coach that I have right now is a marvelous coach. Spars with me every time we work out, which is twice a week. I spar 12 rounds, 12 2-minute rounds with him a week. And I can tell you that is a hell of a lot of boxing, and it is tough. He doesn't hit me as hard as he could. He's 43, I'm 69, so that's a good thing. But he's hard on me, and he brings out the best in me. He doesn't give me anything. And he wasn't like this when we started out working out, but he's gotten progressively tougher because he's showing me I'm getting better. It's highly motivating when your boxing coach is hard on you. And when your boxing coach treats you like, all you want to do is a little cardio workout, that's not highly motivating. Getting hit and trying to figure out how to hit him, that's highly motivating. And it is very, very hard to do. I like to say that bad guys hit the people they love, and boxers love the people they hit. And that's why you always see boxers hugging each other at the end of a round. It means thank you for the fight. You put everything on the line, I put everything on the line.
Yeah.
We're the men in the ring. And it's hard. It's hard, but I'll tell you, it has a great feeling of closeness about it, and a lot of trust. And I think that's a good example of what we talked about before, about the kind of physical intimacy that men can have. I mean, the greatest day I had in boxing so far was at the end of, maybe it was the 450th round. I sparred with my current coach, and it was a good set of 6 rounds. He was all sweaty and I was all sweaty, and he came over to my corner and he grabbed my head in his hands and he said, "That was beautiful. I love you."
Oh.
And when I walked out on the street, I said, "Wow, hell, I can die happy." I mean, he was a real boxer. He had a lot of fights. And if, that's highly motivating. It was not that, I didn't look like hell. But it was exciting that he felt that I was in some sense a worthy opponent. He sure was a worthy opponent for me. It's a great thing. I didn't have any understanding of this until I started to box.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand how violence can work to create community until I started to box. One of the things I say in my book on modern masculinity is that there's no masculinity without an audience. If 2 men fighting in the backyard, there's tournaments in the Middle Ages, combat in the Middle Ages was observed and reported on. I mean, it was sort of like an official thing. What knight killed the other knight, and that kind of thing. The kind of boxing match that you're talking about that this man set up in the neighborhood is honorable because it's public, and I'm sure it was regulated. And that's a huge improvement on using violence to settle a score over gang violence. And there's a lot of stories in boxing about that very kind of thing. It's honorable because it's public. I talk about a scale of masculinity, and it could be based on intelligence, it could be based on physical strength. My previous scale of masculinity was always based on professional achievement. The most manly professor was the one who'd published the most. But in the boxing ring, nobody cares who's written a book. Mm-hmm. Nobody who cares who says he don't or he doesn't. Nobody pays any attention to that. In the boxing ring, the more manly man is the better fighter, the one who doesn't quit. And but it has to be observed, that somebody sees the 2 men doing what they do, sees that they follow the rules, see that they both fight honorably. Mm-hmm. And one thing about boxing that I really started to value is that there's no shame in losing. Well, 2 men get in the ring, one is probably going to come out a loser. Yes. That does not mean there's anything dishonorable about what he did.
Right, exactly. I was just going to say, it would appear that if you lose with honor, it's better than if you win without it.
Yeah, absolutely. Competition brings out the best in us. At least it brings out the best in me. When I was still teaching, I wanted my students to get as much out of the classroom as they could. I prepared for every class because there was something about it that made me feel I got to be ready for this. Mm-hmm. And the boxing is the same way. I'm going to get in the ring with my coach at 11 o'clock tomorrow. I'm going to be ready for him because he's going to be watching to see if I make the same mistakes I made on Tuesday, if I paid any attention to what he told me on Tuesday. That scrutiny, that's public, and I think that encourages me to do my best. I can't see anything toxic about that. I can't see anything violent about that. I think it's really good.
Oh, absolutely. I think so too. I think the reason why competition is considered toxic to progressives is that it flies against what's at the core of their belief system is all people, all cultures, all societies are equal. Everyone is the same. And to differentiate between people as not being the same means that you put one in a victim group and one in an oppressor group, and we don't want that. We want to level the playing field across the board for everyone. So this is the way the world should be because I believe that all people are the same, and because they're not in a position where they're on the same footing as everyone else, then this must be a consequence of some bigotry or
Absolutely.
oppression or some exploitation. So
Right.
because of that, we need to give those people a leg up because
Mhm.
they were treated unfair by the group that has what I perceive to be, privilege, power, whatever. So
Let
when
me
you
say-
when you see the world that way, then you want to eliminate things like competition and meritocracy and
Right.
all of that. That's why they're against, competitiveness. Lastly, on the Dick and Cherry Show #2, Allison joins Richard and Anna Cherry as they discuss differences between male and female brains, autism, wolves, and more.
Dogs, you'll find that this differentiation that they have is similar to the difference between more autistic versus less autistic in the association of the amygdala, which is the social learning, and specifically oxytocin levels. And so the thing is, wolves operate in smaller groups, and and one of the things that you can kind of associate it with autism is a lack of use of facial recognition cues, et cetera, for social learning. And they also, if you kind of put this together with the operation of smaller groups, you find that basically that there's a difference in what the animals are paying attention to. And I'm trying to relate all of these things, so you have to excuse me as I jump around a little bit and stop me if it's starting to get too far afield, and just ask me what the hell I'm talking about. But so what I'm saying here is that in humans, what we find is that males and females basically are differentiated along this autistic spectrum line. And that is the idea I'm trying to get across here is that the amygdala is not just social learning, but it is very strongly implicated in attention. In other words, what it is that you find to be attentive to. What do you need to attend to? And if we look at our idea of hunter gatherers, where the females were operating in larger groups in gathering, and men were operating in the smaller groups of hunters going off in just the amount. There's a balance in group size and how large of animal you can take down versus how much reward for each of the individuals that was involved in taking down that animal determines the group size of cooperative animals like wolves, for instance. So getting back to the idea of a differentiated amygdala. So one of the things that we find in the difference between male and female brains is this differentiated amygdala, and it is along the whole autistic spectrum. And then when you find when autistic spectrum becomes extreme, they are they don't look people in the eye. They have a hard time with remembering faces, so there's basically a social dysfunction there. But what I'm saying is I believe that instead of it, it's only dysfunctional when it becomes extreme. And I think that the difference between these two mindsets, it can be categorized in one of the functions of the amygdala, which is what you attend to as important. In other words, what your brain decides is important to pay attention to. And I can go down the line here in the various studies, but let me try to lay out the general idea here a little bit. And that is specifically that if you are more attentive to social cues, and in social behaviors, the behaviors of human beings or other animals or anything like that, when it comes to behaviors, those are things that are of the mental realm that can be very fuzzy. In other words, the physical realm, it's very binary in nature many times. The switch is either up or down. Something is there or isn't there. There's not really a fuzzy thing there. There's not a lot of mutual exclusivity. Whereas in social situations, there is a lot of mutual exclusivity, but something both is and isn't true to various degrees. People both do things and don't do things in the exact same situation, and so there's a lot of unreliability in when you're attempting to figure out social situations. And so the way in which you look at patterns, say for instance, you're trying to best decide how to use a given system. If you are focused on social systems, then you're going to have to be able to pattern recognize things that have a tremendous amount of overlap and a tremendous amount of apparent mutual exclusivity. Whereas when you are trying to see the way that that reality works. In other words, like the physical world and how, when I throw a spear or when I'm chasing animals, mutual exclusivity typically doesn't really it's very hard line. In other words, it is this or it is not, and there's a lot more logic based ideology in the way that you deal with the physical world as opposed to the way that you deal with the mental world. And even the way in which you store things is vastly different. In other words, like for instance, in mathematical ability, 2 + 2 is true if you're standing on your head, you're on a mountain, it's always true. It's always the same thing. Whereas when two people, when a person says a certain thing or does a certain thing or whatever, it is extremely context dependent if you're attempting to manipulate a social environment. In other words, what they do has a meaning that is very context dependent. So you don't get to just save that information of 2 + 2 and I can always use it the same way regardless of the situation. Instead, I have to save all of the information about this given situation along with that particular interaction. And so the way in which you store data, I'm looking at this just from like a systems design approach, computer programming. The way in which you would store the data is different. And the way in which you would use your pattern recognition system would be very wide open and very overlapping in one case, whereas in another case you would be strongly looking for mutual exclusivities, and there would be a tremendous amount of overlap and reuse of given circumstances. So what I'm saying is that I believe that these two mindsets are kind of mutually exclusive in that each one confers if you have benefit in one, you kind of have deficit in the other. They are there's a tendency for them to be mutually exclusive. Now, I'm not saying it's completely binary, but I'm saying that they're the more you lean towards one or the other, the more that you're either pattern matching things that overlap a whole lot, or you're being very fastidious in the way in which you look at things and say, okay, this is a good pattern that is extremely well pruned, and I'm not bringing in a bunch of very unreliable data. And so basically what I'm trying to get at is that there's these two different ways of doing things, and it seems to be very much based upon the size of groups. In other words, like the size of the group determines how important it is and how much of your life depends upon interaction with a group, as opposed to how much of your life depends upon interaction with physical reality. And as groups get larger, of course, your survival is far more dependent upon the group, because the way in which they keep the way in which they gather resources, the way in which they share resources or do not, and so it's an interesting perspective to look at this difference between the way in which dogs versus wolves interact, and the way in which more modern humans may interact versus others, and how we may be there's been a recent kind of uptick in the autistic spectrum, and it may be that because of our use of certain systems that we basically are tending to have brains that function better for certain tasks, which are more logical, rational, etc. But I think that at the same time, we may be having a tendency towards an extremity of the opposite happening as well. In other words, those the entire way in which their brain works is much more socially defined, and so there may be kind of I'm saying there's kind of it seems to be a bifurcation that I'm personally noticing. Now this is my own take on things, but I did want to bring up some of the things that I'd run into here in looking through some of it. Going back to what
I think people are waiting. People are waiting for your conclusion that dogs are autistic.
No, actually, I think that they're that what you'll find is that wolves are a little more autistic spectrum type than dogs are. It's a smooth continuum. It's not, binary. You are autistic or you are not. That's why you have Asperger's and you have various, and that's why you can actually say that men are lean more towards autistic spectrum than women do. And instead of, because what we find when we actually lesion the amygdala, when there is actually damage to the amygdala, then there's a loss of function that is not like autism. In other words, autism is not like damage to the amygdala, which makes it where you have problems with attention, have problems in memory, and so instead of seeing autistic spectrum as a dysfunction, we need to instead see it as a differentiation and a different model that is equally useful for given certain circumstances.
But that's an interesting. It has an interesting implication because dogs are, of course, the domesticated form of wolves. So maybe autistic people are the non-domesticated form of humans.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it seems kind of like it. But I think what it is it has to do with being better in smaller groups. In other words, the people who are a little more, they may be better adapted to smaller groups.
From Hunting with Wolves, humans conquered the world, and there's a new theory that the pair up between humans and wolves actually was what caused the Neanderthal extinction, because the wolves gave us such an advantage over the Neanderthals' hunting methods that we either out-hunted them into extinction or we actually actively killed them. But in conjunction with that theory is another theory that's about our white. We have white scleras. I think that's how you say it. Essentially, it's the white around the iris of our eyes. And what that facilitates is us seeing what each other is looking at. And there are no other great apes that actually have this feature. This is pretty unique to us. It's completely unique to us, in fact. And like I said, what it facilitates is that theory of mind, knowing what other humans are looking at. And what's interesting is that wolves have the same feature. So part of the theory is that wolves actually changed the color of our scleras to white instead of black. And it's delineated by a book called The Invaders: How Humans and Their Dogs Drove Neanderthals to Extinction by someone called Shipman. I don't know his first name. Her first name, sorry. And she says the main advantage of having white sclera is that it's very easy to work out what another person is gazing at. It provides a very useful form of nonverbal communication that would have been of immense help to early hunters. They would have been able to communicate silently but effectively. Thus, the mutation.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Conferring white sclera could have been increasingly common among modern humans 40,000 years ago and would have conferred an advantage on those who were hunting with dogs. And that would be interesting because that would mean that Neanderthals had black instead of whites to their eyes. They had blacks. Oh, that would be so creepy.
That's racist!
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows you think we should have shown, please leave a comment on the video and include a timestamp. Thank you, and Badger on.